If you have been following my journey this far, then you know how frustrated and confused I am at this point. I started all of this to prove that science has the answers to the origin of the universe and subsequently all living organisms, and to debunk the myth of a God who created everything. Unfortunately, in part 2, my scientific research fell short of my expectations and demonstrated how little we understand about our universe. In fact, most scientists now agree that 96% of the universe is made up of matter and energy that we can't see, touch, or interact with. Not only do we understand very little about this 96%, we also lack universal agreement on the other 4%, which makes up the planets, stars, and galaxies that we can see. That's the frustrating part. The confusing part is when I looked into what I believe to be the irrational side of the debate, the creationist side. I researched the Bible at length, planning to expose its contents as a series of myths without any historical evidence to back it up. But in part 3, I uncovered over 300 extremely specific Old Testament prophecies about a future Savior that appears to be fulfilled in the person of Jesus. And these documents were carbon dated before he was born. Convinced Jesus had to be a fake, in part 4, I examined numerous non-biblical historical documents from the 1st and 2nd centuries, only to find multiple writings, even some from anti-Christian authors, that not only verify his existence, but mention his miracles and even his resurrection as if they were a fact. I just don't understand. Not to be deterred, however, in part 5, I surmised Jesus had to be the ultimate magician. So I decided to take a look into the lives of his closest friends and followers. They had to know the truth and would have helped him in his charade to impersonate the Savior. It seemed to be the only remaining answer. Unfortunately, my research did not support this idea. Historical records indicate that nearly all of Jesus' closest friends and family died horrible deaths for their faith in him and for their conviction that they saw him after he rose from the dead. At this point, my confusion level was at an all-time high. I decided to go back to science one more time in a final effort to accomplish my original objective. Though cosmological theories and discoveries had let me down, I decided to research the origin of man. Evolution had to prove that God had nothing to do with the creation or progression of mankind. And with any success, I could just disregard the confusing ideas from my previous Bible research. I actually spent years researching the theory of evolution. I will summarize my findings for you here to save time, but I encourage you to do your own research.
Hello everyone, this is part 6 of The Skeptic's Journey, a true story of an atheist's multi-year search for truth. These are his exact words. This is his story, his journey.
First, I agree with Charles Darwin about how plants and animals adapt and improve over time, and how the fittest survive and reproduce. This shouldn't be in question, it's apparent in nature. But I am left with dozens of issues when this theory is used to explain the development of completely new species, or when it's taken back in time to the primordial soup to define how all life came from a single source. There are many scientists with exhaustive list of issues with the evolution theory, but here is my brief summary. There is not scientific consensus on the original formation of amino acids into proteins, or how these eventually developed into single-celled organisms with a membrane, which is already tremendously more complex. How did these single-celled creatures combine to become multi-celled, and what evidence do we see today of these early multi-celled plants and animals? We should see more multi-celled organisms with simpler structures than we do. And how did these multi-celled organisms produce cells of a completely different type to eventually include the 200 different cell types found in humans today? And more perplexing, how did these cells combine into organs with specific functions that are interdependent? How did we develop human senses? And finally, how did the human body evolve into a system that reproduces with distinct male and female sexes? Bottom line, how did random mutations from a single-celled organism produce the extreme diversity of life we see on the planet today? Which is recently estimated to contain over 1 trillion species, not counting the ones that are extinct. Where are all of the various stepping stone mutations? Well, evolutionists say the majority of these are extinct. Where is all the fossil evidence to support all of these species originating from a common source? Evolutionists say that it's too far back in history for fossil evidence to exist. After all of my research, I had to come to a few of my own conclusions. Unfortunately, I found there isn't a lot of real evidence to support molecules demand evolution, only theories. The math doesn't add up. Evolutionists claim the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, which is already suspect, but let's use it. If there are 1 trillion species on the planet today, then even with linear progression, we should see a new species emerging every 1.6 days. But in reality, if you assume a geometric progression starting from a single source, it would be closer to 13 new species per day. Where's the evidence? In just the last 500 years, we should have witnessed the emergence of over 2 million new species. Evolution scientists point to DNA similarities between humans and chimps as some sort of proof to support evolution. But what if 100,000 years from now, someone unearthed your wooden home and your wooden doghouse? Should they assume your home evolved from your doghouse? Of course not. These were just similar building blocks used by their designer. Last, but certainly not least, I have to be humble. I admit there are others who are more experienced than myself, and I may have made some mistakes or inaccurate assumptions in my research. So I decided to take a look at world-renowned scientists, experts in their respective fields, and here's what I found. According to a 2009 study, 51% of biologists and 55% of chemists believe in God or some form of higher power. And one of the greatest among them is Francis Collins. Francis Collins was appointed by former President Obama as the head of the Human Genome Project. He is arguably one of the most knowledgeable persons on the planet on human DNA. He believes in God, and he believes Jesus is Lord and Savior. So, with all that said, I'm nearing the end of my journey. Science has let me down and frustrated me. It's a whole lot of theories with much less proof than public perception would have you believe. And there are plenty of world-renowned scientists who believe in God and Jesus. What do I do from here? Could Jesus really be God?
Do you believe we all evolved from a single cell? No matter where you stand on the spectrum of belief, I encourage you to continue with us in viewing The Skeptic's Journey, a true story. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know. You can click here to subscribe to our channel and here to continue watching The Skeptic's Journey. If you'd like to help us accomplish our mission, you can make a tax-deductible donation to our ministry at christianityengaged.org. Thanks, and God bless.